You're lying in bed at 2 a.m. and your mind is running. Not just thinking, being run. The same conversation replays for the 100th time, each replay slightly different but going nowhere. You know it's pointless. You've told yourself to stop a dozen times in the last hour alone, but the thoughts keep coming, insistent, relentless, like someone else is doing the thinking, and you're just the unwilling audience trapped in a theater you cannot leave. There's a particular exhaustion to this. Not the tiredness that comes from mental effort, from solving difficult problems or concentrating deeply. This is different. This is the fatigue of being occupied, the uncanny sensation that you're not alone in your own head. Maybe it's the argument you rehearse endlessly, perfecting responses to confrontations that will never happen. Maybe it's the catastrophic planning, mapping out every disaster scenario, every possible failure, running simulations of ruin on an endless loop. Maybe it's the obsessive analysis of a past conversation, dissecting tone and word choice and hidden meaning until the memory becomes more real than the original moment. The content varies. The experience remains consistent. You cannot stop, and you know you cannot stop. And this knowledge changes nothing. Most people call this overthinking, anxiety, a bad habit, a lack of discipline or mental control. The prevailing wisdom says you're thinking too much, that you need to quiet your mind, practice mindfulness, redirect your attention. The underlying assumption is simple. This is something you're doing wrong, and if you just tried harder, thought differently, disciplined yourself more effectively, you could make it stop. This is not what's happening. Carl Jung spent decades studying what he called complexes, autonomous psychic entities that function like splinter personalities within the larger self. Through his word association experiments at the Burgholzli Hospital, Jung discovered something revolutionary. Within your psyche, live independent beings with their own memories, their own emotional charge, their own agendas. When he presented stimulus words to subjects and measured their response times, certain words triggered significant delays, strange associations, complete memory blanks. These weren't random errors. They were complex indicators, evidence of emotionally charged unconscious content operating independently of conscious control. Complexes behave like independent beings, Jung wrote. This is not metaphor. This is structure. When you're caught in overthinking, you are not the one thinking. A complex has activated. It has its own cognitive architecture, its own gravitational pull, its own purpose that may directly contradict everything your conscious mind wants. You are not directing the mental activity. You are being directed. The complex is the hidden thinker, and you have mistaken its agenda for your own reflection. This is why willpower fails. This is why trying harder makes it worse. You are not fighting a habit or a mood or an excess of mental energy. You are fighting an entity with genuine psychic coherence, what Jung called an animated foreign body in the sphere of consciousness. During activation, you experience what the legal system would call diminished responsibility. You are, quite literally, not fully in charge. The thought arises unsummoned. It persists against your will. It returns despite every effort to dismiss it. This is not you thinking. This is you being thought. And recognizing this distinction, truly recognizing it, is the first step toward understanding what overthinking actually is, where it comes from, and why the standard solutions have never worked. Because you're not dealing with thinking at all. You're dealing with possession. To understand possession, you must first understand architecture. Jung made his discovery in 1904, working at the Burgholzli Psychiatric Hospital in Zurich. He presented subjects with stimulus words, mother, father, money, death, and measured their response times with a stopwatch. Most words produced immediate, unremarkable associations, but certain words triggered something else entirely. Delayed responses, strange, disconnected associations, complete memory blanks. Physiological changes, sweating, flushed skin, shifts in breathing. These weren't random errors, they were complex indicators. Evidence of emotionally charged content operating beneath conscious awareness, content that possessed its own structure, its own gravitational field, its own resistance to conscious control. What Jung discovered was architecture, not vague emotional disturbance, not loose associations, but organized psychic entities with complete cognitive systems. Each complex carries its own memory network that attracts related material like a magnet. Each possesses its own emotional charge that hijacks attention when activated. Each operates with its own intentions that may directly oppose what the conscious ego wants or believes. Complexes behave like independent beings, Jung stated in his collected works. This is not poetic language. This is structural description. A complex functions as what Jung called a splinter psyche, a fragment of personality that is broken off from the main structure and now operates autonomously, with its own logic, its own purposes, its own life. You see this in real time when a thought arises that you did not summon, when an idea persists despite your active efforts to dismiss it. When you find yourself thinking in patterns you consciously reject but cannot seem to escape. The complex is speaking, not you. The complex has its own voice, and during activation, that voice becomes louder than conscious intention. Jung used precise legal terminology to describe this state: diminished responsibility. An active complex puts us momentarily under a state of duress, of compulsive thinking and acting, for which, under certain conditions, the only appropriate term would be the judicial concept of diminished responsibility. During complex activation, your executive function, your capacity to choose, direct, control, is compromised. You are not fully in charge of the mental activity occurring under your name. This is why willpower fails spectacularly when applied to overthinking. You are attempting to use ego strength to overpower an entity that operates outside ego control. The harder you try to stop the thoughts, the more evidence you provide that the complex, not the ego, is running the operation. You are not fighting an excess of thinking. You are fighting an animated foreign body in the sphere of consciousness, something that has genuine autonomy and will not respond to the tools that work for voluntary mental activity. The complex does what it wants. It thinks what it wants. It pursues its own agenda, regardless of your conscious objections. And it will continue doing so until you stop trying to eliminate it and start trying to understand what it is, where it came from, and what psychological function it serves. Because every complex has an origin, every autonomous entity was created by something, and that something is always the same. A traumatic nucleus that crystallized into psychological structure and now exerts gravitational pull on everything that enters its orbit. Every complex organizes around a center. Jung called this the nuclear element, a frozen traumatic memory that becomes the gravitational core attracting all related psychic material. The feeling-toned content, the complex, consists of a nuclear element and a large number of secondarily constellated associations, Jung wrote. The nuclear element is characterized by its feeling tone, the emphasis resulting from the intensity of affect. This nucleus has dual composition. First, the psychic trace of the originating trauma, the image, the sensation, the emotional imprint of what happened. Second, an archetypal component that gives the personal wound transpersonal dimensions. A child humiliated by a critical father develops not merely a father complex, but a complex that connects personal memory to the archetypal pattern of the tyrannical authority figure. The personal is always embedded in the collective. Your wound carries the shape of wounds that have existed since consciousness began. This architecture explains why certain themes recur obsessively across decades. The traumatic nucleus exerts gravitational pull. new experiences that share any associative connection, a tone of voice, an emotional atmosphere, a power dynamic, get captured in its orbit. A woman with an abusive father complex may find that any man who reminds her of that original intensity constellates the complex and floods her with the full accumulated force of decades of related material. She may avoid such men entirely, or find herself irrationally drawn to them. Either way, her life becomes progressively more restricted by this gravitational field she cannot see but constantly navigates. The complex grows through repetition. Each activation adds new layers, like geological strata forming around the original core. This is why overthinking worsens with time if left unaddressed. Every rumination adds material to the complex, strengthening its gravitational field, expanding its territory. You are not merely replaying the past. You are actively building the psychological structure that will constrain your future. The thoughts circle. They orbit the traumatic center without ever entering it. You think about the wound constantly, but never think into the wound itself. The mind produces endless cognitive byproducts: analysis, justification, catastrophic prediction, obsessive planning, that form a mental halo around the nucleus. But the core remains untouched, unmetabolized, perpetually active beneath the surface activity that exhausts you. This is the orbit without entry, the circling that goes nowhere, and it will continue until you recognize what Jung recognized, that the repetition itself signals something unresolved, something frozen in time, something that has never been properly integrated into the larger story of who you are. The complex has an agenda, and that agenda is not random. It is attempting to complete something that was left incomplete, to process something that was never processed, to bring forward material that consciousness has refused to receive. But consciousness is not passive in this refusal. It actively defends against what the complex carries, and that defense creates a war. Understanding the traumatic core reveals why the psyche cannot simply integrate what the complex carries, because the ego is actively defending against it. Jung understood neurosis as fundamentally a state of self-division. Neurosis is a cleavage, the state of being at war with oneself, he wrote. The psyche is composed of opposing forces, the ego's conscious orientation and the unconscious's compensatory attitude. When these forces cannot find integration, they enter conflict, and that conflict is what you hear when overthinking takes over. The sound of internal warfare. The ego attempts to maintain its position through rational analysis. The unconscious counters with intrusive doubts, catastrophic scenarios, obsessive questions. Neither side can win decisively. The battle perpetuates. You experience this as thoughts arguing with thoughts. One voice insisting you're fine, another voice cataloging every reason you're not. One narrative claiming control, another narrative undermining every claim. An internal civil war with no armistice in sight. What is the ego defending against? Shadow material, the parts of yourself you have rejected. Instinctual demands incompatible with your self-image. The unconscious attitude that opposes your conscious stance. Archetypal contents, too powerful for the ego to integrate on its own. The neurosis is thus a defense against the objective, inner activity of the psyche, Jung explained, or an attempt, somewhat dearly paid for, to escape from the inner voice and hence from the vocation. This reframes everything. You are not thinking too much about problems. You are thinking defensively against psychic contents you cannot face. The rumination is a holding action, keeping awareness focused on surface concerns, while deeper material remains safely unexamined. The exhaustion of overthinking is not from excess mental activity, but from the energy required to maintain psychological defenses against what the unconscious keeps trying to bring forward. When consciousness excludes material, that material does not disappear. It accumulates in the unconscious and builds pressure. The activity of consciousness is selective, Jung noted. Selection demands direction, but direction requires the exclusion of everything irrelevant. This is bound to make the conscious orientation one-sided. The excluded contents form what Jung called a counterposition that strengthens in proportion to conscious one-sidedness. Eventually, the repressed material breaks through. Not as integrated understanding, but as intrusive thoughts that cannot be dismissed. If you have repressed vulnerability, thoughts about failure flood you. If you have suppressed anger, thoughts about injustice consume you. If you have rejected your shadow ambitions, thoughts about inadequacy torment you. The intrusive material is not random. It is exactly what you have tried hardest to exclude. The harder you push certain contents away, the more violently they return. The conscious goes right, the unconscious goes left. Dissociation becomes the foundation of neurotic experience. And the overthinking you're caught in is the phenomenological evidence of this split, proof that something in you is trying to speak and something else in you is refusing to listen. The ego maintains its story. The unconscious tells a different story. And between these two stories, you are torn apart. But this civil war is not the whole picture, because during acute episodes, the war ends. One side wins completely, and when that happens, you are no longer yourself at all. When the internal warfare reaches critical intensity, something shifts. Jung retrieved the ancient language of possession to describe what happens during complex activation. In the Middle Ages, this identification with a complex went by another name. It was called possession. This is not rhetorical flourish. This is phenomenological precision. During acute overthinking episodes, you do not have the complex. The complex has you. Though far more important theoretically is that complexes can have us, Jung emphasized. The possessed state involves a momentary and unconscious alteration of personality. You identify completely with the complex's perspective. You see the world through its emotional lens. You react according to its habitual patterns. You lose access to your broader psychological resources, humor, perspective, flexibility, proportion. The complex becomes the only voice you can hear, and you mistake that voice for your own thinking. The loss of choice is central. People in this state are often not aware it's happening. They are simply in a mood, and the behavior seems congruent with the ego. Only afterward comes the recognition. Something got into me. I wasn't myself. I don't know what I was thinking. The overthinking felt like your own analysis while it was occurring, but it was the complex's analysis, colored entirely by its traumatic history and archetypal patterns, running its agenda through your consciousness. Jung compared complexes to elfin beings who could not learn the Lord's Prayer correctly. No matter how many times they tried to say, "Our Father, who art in heaven," they said, "Our Father, who art not in heaven." Complexes are unteachable by rational instruction. They operate on different principles than ego consciousness. They follow their own logic, pursue their own purposes, see through their own distorted lens. You cannot think your way out of complex possession because thinking itself has been captured by the very entity you're trying to escape. This explains the cruel paradox of the experience. The harder you try to stop the thoughts, the more evidence you provide that you are not in control. Willpower engages the ego, but during possession, ego supremacy is precisely what has been compromised. You are addressing the wrong system with the wrong tools. The evidence of complex activity surrounds you if you learn to read it. Complexes slip the wrong word into your mouth. They make you forget the name of the person you're about to introduce. They cause a tickle in your throat just when the softest passage is being played on stage. They operate in waves. Their intensity curve has a wavelength of hours, days, or weeks. You think you've resolved something, achieved clarity, moved past the issue. Then a week later it returns with full force, as if the resolution never happened. Because to the complex it didn't. The complex was dormant, not defeated, and it remained dormant only until something in your environment triggered its reactivation, which raises the question, what triggers a complex? What constellates this autonomous entity and brings it flooding back into consciousness with all its accumulated force? The possession state does not arise spontaneously. It requires activation. Complexes remain dormant until something constellates them. Jung called this constellation, a term that simply expresses the fact that an outward situation releases a psychic process in which certain contents gather together and prepare for action. The triggering stimulus may be trivial, someone's offhand comment, a subtle shift in atmosphere, a minor frustration at work. But if that stimulus touches the complex's associative network, the response is wildly disproportionate to the present cause. A colleague uses the same dismissive tone your father used. Suddenly, you're not ruminating about today's meeting. You're flooded with 30 years of accumulated material about authority, inadequacy, and never being enough. The full emotional charge of the complex pours into consciousness. Every related memory, every similar wound, every instance where you felt that particular form of diminishment activates simultaneously. You experience decades in seconds. This is why your reactions sometimes feel insane to you. The present stimulus is genuinely small, but the internal response is enormous because you're not responding to what just happened. You're responding to everything that has ever happened that carries the same emotional signature, the same archetypal pattern, the same nuclear element. The complex has been touched, and the entire structure lights up. Jung noted that complexes operate in waves with a wavelength of hours, days, or weeks. The overthinking subsides for periods. You achieve what feels like resolution, clarity, peace. Then something reconstellates the material and you're back in the grip, as if the previous resolution never occurred. Because to the complex it didn't. The complex was not integrated, it was dormant. And dormancy is not transformation, but the deepest distortion occurs in your experience of time itself. Trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk discovered that traumatic memories are organized on a somatosensory level, as visual images and physical sensations that retain their here and now quality. The hippocampus, responsible for temporal context and memory consolidation, is impaired by trauma. The amygdala's hyperactivity keeps emotional memory vivid and present tense. Trauma survivors, van der Kolk observed, continued to be there and did not know how to be here, fully alive in the present. The trauma alarm system cannot tell time. When triggered, the traumatic material is re-experienced as present, not remembered as past. During overthinking episodes, you are not analyzing something that happened years ago. You are experiencing it as if it is happening now. Time has collapsed. The past is not past. It is perpetually present, perpetually active, perpetually threatening. This is why rational arguments that it's over fail completely. To the traumatized psyche, it is not over. It is never over. It is always now. You are not ruminating about the past. You are trapped in a psychological state where the past has become an eternal present, and the overthinking is your mind's desperate attempt to process what cannot be processed because it has never been properly encoded as memory in the first place. But this temporal collapse reveals something deeper still. You are not one unified self experiencing this distortion. You are multiple selves in conflict, each carrying different wounds, each speaking different truths, each fighting for recognition within the internal chaos. The temporal collapse and trigger architecture point to a more fundamental truth about psychic structure. Jung recognized the psyche as fundamentally multiple, Not one unified self, but an archipelago of partial personalities, each complex functioning as what he called a splinter psyche with its own perspective and agenda. Under normal conditions, the ego coordinates this multiplicity into functional unity. Under traumatic conditions, the fragmentation becomes extreme and coordination fails. The tendency to split means that parts of the psyche detach themselves from consciousness to such an extent that they not only appear foreign, but lead an autonomous life of their own, Jung wrote. These are not metaphorical parts. These are structural entities, each carrying distinct memories, each operating with different emotional logic, each pursuing incompatible goals. And during overthinking, you hear them all at once, different voices arguing, contradicting, attacking, defending, each claiming to be the truth. The warring voices in overthinking are these fragmentary personalities in conflict. One voice insists you're capable, another catalogs every past failure. One voice plans for the future, another replays traumatic history. One voice seeks connection, another warns of inevitable betrayal. The ego, rather than coordinating these voices into coherent narrative, becomes one voice among many, often the weakest. You experience this as internal argument that goes nowhere because genuine integration would require recognizing that you are multiple, and such recognition threatens the ego's fundamental assumption of unity. Trauma researcher Donald Kalshed observed how childhood trauma creates what he calls a self-care system, protective and persecutory internal objects that attack the self-esteem of the patient and drive them into a dark sense of their own inadequacy, their own defectiveness, their own inferiority. The child who was abused internalizes both victim and perpetrator positions. The anger that could not be expressed outward gets turned inward. The child takes up the position of the aggressor against themselves. Now both positions exist internally, attacking and being attacked in perpetual traumatic reenactment that feels like thinking, but is actually internal theater. The obsessive thoughts about being worthless, unlovable, fundamentally flawed, these are not random self-criticism. They are shadow material that has been refused conscious inclusion and now exerts influence from the shadows. The content remains frozen in its original form, never updated by subsequent experience, never nuanced by mature reflection. It persists in primitive intensity because you have refused it the developmental relationship with consciousness that would allow it to evolve. This is what overthinking actually is. Multiple dissociated parts in conflict. Not one self-thinking too much. You are witnessing internal theater mistaken for analysis, different complexes arguing their positions, different wounds demanding attention, different developmental stages frozen in time and speaking simultaneously. And beneath all this chaos, beneath all this warfare and fragmentation, the psyche is attempting something. It is not merely breaking down. It is trying to signal. It is trying to correct an imbalance that consciousness has refused to acknowledge. The fragmentation and warfare are not random chaos. They are purposeful activity. The unconscious is not merely disruptive. It is compensatory. Every extreme conscious attitude provokes counterbalancing activity from below. The principal function of the unconscious is to effect a compensation and to produce a balance, Jung stated. All extreme conscious tendencies are softened and toned down through a counter-impulse in the unconscious. When the ego seeks certainty, the unconscious produces doubt. When consciousness over-rationalizes, the unconscious floods awareness with affect-laden thoughts. When the conscious attitude becomes too narrow, the excluded contents return as obsessive themes. This is not pathology. This is psychic homeostasis, the system attempting to restore balance through the only means available. The psyche is a self-regulating system that maintains its equilibrium just as the body does, Jung explained. Every process that goes too far immediately and inevitably calls forth compensations. Too little on one side results in too much on the other. The floods of worry and overthinking are not meaningless torment, but meaningful signal. The unconscious indicating that conscious attitude has become dangerously one-sided. This reframes everything. The doubt you fight against carries information the ego has excluded. The anxiety you try to suppress contains recognition the ego has avoided. The obsessive questions contain knowledge the ego has refused. The therapeutic task is not eliminating compensatory material, but receiving its message and adjusting conscious attitude accordingly. Jung went further. Neurosis is really an attempt at self-cure. It is an attempt of the self-regulating psychic system to restore the balance, in no way different from the function of dreams, only rather more forceful and drastic. Overthinking, in this framework, is not malfunction but meaningful activity. The repetitive thoughts signal imbalance. The obsessive themes carry content the ego needs to integrate. The mental torment prevents worse outcomes, forcing attention to material that would otherwise be dangerously ignored. Hidden in the neurosis is a bit of still undeveloped personality, Jung observed, a precious fragment of the psyche lacking which a man is condemned to resignation, bitterness, and everything else that is hostile to life. The overthinking that exhausts you contains developmental potential that merely managing symptoms would foreclose. The complex that possesses you carries energy needed for transformation. What feels like breakdown is actually the psyche's forceful attempt at breakthrough. The symptom is not the enemy. The symptom is the messenger, and what it is trying to tell you is that the way you have been living, the way you have been thinking, the stance you have been maintaining, something essential has been left out. Something crucial has been denied. And until you turn toward what has been excluded, the unconscious will continue speaking louder and louder through the only language available, the language of symptom. But how do you turn toward what you have spent years defending against? How do you listen to what you have refused to hear? The compensatory function reveals that overthinking is attempting communication. But communication requires two parties, and the ego has been talking only to itself. Overthinking is failed dialogue, the ego attempting to solve problems using only conscious resources, talking to itself in closed loops while the unconscious pounds on the door with increasing intensity. What feels like hyperactive cognition is actually cognitive paralysis. The mind unable to transform raw experience into symbolic understanding, unable to metabolize what it compulsively replays. Jung developed a technique to break this closed circuit. He called it active imagination, a method for engaging the unconscious by treating its contents as autonomous entities deserving genuine response. While traditional meditation focuses on detaching from our thoughts and bodily sensations, Jungian analyst Raphael Kruger explains, active imagination has the goal of focusing on the unconscious images and engaging in dialogue with them. It's a dialectical procedure between the conscious ego and the unconscious perspective in which we strive to reach an agreement and find new solutions for our conflicts. The critical distinction, rumination is ego-driven and controlling. Active imagination is receptive and witnessing. Rumination is repetitive without resolution. Dialogue is progressive and transformative. Rumination seeks answers from consciousness alone. Dialogue invites unconscious response. Rumination is closed to surprise. Dialogue is open to the unexpected. Jung was explicit about the ethical requirements. The essential thing is to differentiate oneself from these unconscious contents by personifying them, and at the same time to bring them into relationship with consciousness. You yourself must enter into the process with your personal reactions as if the drama being enacted before your eyes were real. The images must be treated as autonomous entities, not merely ego productions to be manipulated or controlled. This means sitting with the obsessive thought and asking it directly. What do you want from me? What are you trying to show me? What happens if I actually listen instead of fight? It means giving the anxiety a voice and letting it speak its concerns without immediately countering with reassurance. It means personifying the inner critic and asking what wound it is protecting, what vulnerability it is trying to prevent you from experiencing. When active imagination is practiced properly, something remarkable happens. Jung observed that dreaming decreases dramatically because the issues that would have been presented in dreams are confronted and worked out in conscious dialogue. The pressure that manifested as compulsive thought finds appropriate channel and dissipates, not because you've eliminated the complex, but because you've engaged it. Not because you've won the war, but because you've started negotiations. The shift is from monologue to dialogue, from defending to receiving, from trying to think your way out to allowing something other than thinking to emerge. You write with the complex as conversation partner. You give voice to the obsessive thought as a figure with its own perspective. You schedule engagement rather than being randomly captured. You ask, what does this want from me? And when you ask that question genuinely, when you actually listen for response instead of immediately providing your own answer, the nature of overthinking changes. It stops being compulsion and starts becoming something else entirely. The shift from monologue to dialogue begins the transformation, but dialogue itself must evolve from compulsive to conscious. The task is not eliminating repetitive patterns, but transforming their quality. Jung distinguished between what he called virtual repetition, compulsive replay that shields us from life and narrows perspective, and ritual repetition, deliberate engagement that channels psychic energy toward transformative sources. Through ritual, Jung wrote, attention and interest are led back to the inner sacred precinct, which is the source and goal of the psyche. What operated autonomously becomes consciously directed. What possessed you becomes practice you choose. What repeated compulsively becomes deliberate engagement with psychological material. This transformation takes specific forms. Externalization, writing the obsessive thoughts, speaking them aloud, creating art that embodies them, makes internal material observable rather than merely endured. Personification, giving voice to the thought as a figure you can dialogue with, shifts you from identified fusion to witnessing relationship. Scheduled engagement, setting aside deliberate time rather than being captured randomly, reclaims agency from the complex's timeline. And always, the ethical question, what does this want from me? Not what do I want from it, but what is it asking of me? Jung emphasized that symptoms should be imagined into, not merely eliminated. What archetypal figure inhabits this compulsion? What soul need seeks expression? What form might honor its communication? The symptom is not destroyed, but deepened into meaning. But this work cannot be done alone. Jungian analyst Jan Wiener's research emphasizes that the capacity to symbolize, to transform raw experience into integrated meaning, can only emerge through relationship. The symbolic function so crucial for metabolizing experience develops interpersonally, not in isolation. Complexes find transformation through being witnessed, held, and metabolized in the presence of another consciousness that can bear what you cannot yet bear alone. Jung understood transference as more than distortion. It was the vehicle through which complexes could be witnessed, held, and transformed. The transference phenomenon is without doubt one of the most important syndromes in the process of individuation. Its wealth of meanings goes far beyond mere personal likes and dislikes. The therapeutic container works through holding projections until the client can reclaim them, through mutual transformation in genuine encounter, through witnessing without rushing to fix or resolve prematurely. When complexes find adequate witness, they lose their possessing quality and become objects of reflection. the material that looped endlessly in isolated consciousness, moves and transforms through relational engagement. The overthinking that resisted all solitary intervention yields to the simple but profound fact of being genuinely seen. What wholeness looks like. Not elimination of complexes, but conscious relationship with them. Not denial of multiplicity, but coordination of the archipelago. Not premature resolution, but the capacity to bear tension until something genuinely new emerges. The serious problems in life are never fully solved, Jung observed. If ever they should appear to be so, it is a sure sign that something has been lost. The meaning and purpose of a problem seem to lie not in its solution, but in our working at it incessantly. The overthinking that torments you contains the seeds of your development. The complexes that possess you carry energy needed for transformation. What feels like prison is actually the door to liberation, but only when you stop fighting the symptom and start listening to its message. The compulsion can become consciousness. The repetition can become ritual, and the war within can become the very conversation that makes you whole. Thank you for exploring this with me. If this resonated, I invite you to like and subscribe. This work deepens when we're not alone in it. Share this with someone who might recognize themselves here, and leave a comment with your reflections. What complex has possessed you? What message have you been refusing to hear? Thank you for doing this consciousness work. See you in the next exploration.